Is Donald Trump's victory a mandate? Well, the answer is not so simple. Welcome to Law and Society. Please subscribe and let's talk about this. First, I'm going to give you a dictionary definition of a mandate. Mandate is the authority to carry out a policy regarded as given by the electorate to a party or candidate that wins an election. Okay? So, in a sense, every election victory is sort of a mandate. The winning candidate wins on a mandate that one half of the nation wants. That does not mean that mandate must be oppressively applied to the entire population. Policies that mimic the majoritarian mandate will inevitably oppress. Policies must have popular appeal, regardless of what one party's mandate is. To that extent, the margin of victory matters. Donald Trump had a larger margin of victory than in the last two elections. But his loss to Biden in 2020 was also his biggest loss. What does that say about a mandate? The electorate rejected Donald's adoption of their mandate in 2016. His policies, with some very competent people around him, failed to meet Americans' needs. But he didn't take responsibility for it or even concede that he lost the election. This time around, his electoral mandate may have more support, but that's only because Democrats failed to see what Americans need and what Americans are most concerned about. Donald's lies played a role in eroding confidence in Democratic policies as well. Biden and Harris's poor messaging on what they were doing for the people also played a role. But that does not mean we should dive into a blame game. We should take responsibility for our actions and stop playing the blame game. It's not the internet's fault that people use it for nefarious reasons. It's the people's fault. It wasn't President Biden's mistake or Vice President Harris's mistake or anybody else's mistakes that gave us this year's election result. It was an aggregation of our actions. So let's blame ourselves, if anybody. If you voted for Harris, even then, see what you did and thought and where that wasn't able to overcome the incendiary messages of MAGA, as well as some hard realities at home. Assert the truth as much as MAGA embraces Donald's lies. Democratic policies work for working and poor Americans. Except Republicans are masters at taking credit for Democratic legislative accomplishments. That has to stop. Don't let Donald take credit for Biden-Harris administration's infrastructure progresses. And keep watch on what Donald will disassemble. Will it be the CHIPS Act or will it be the Affordable Care Act, which is Obamacare? Which department will Donald Trump eliminate? Will it be the Department of Education or FEMA? Those are questions we should find answers to. And those are questions that will answer whether Donald Trump is carrying out a popular mandate as a governing president for all Americans, or whether he is implementing an oppressive majoritarian mandate that he believes the entire nation deserves because one electorate during one election gave him another chance. We also, at the same time, need to reach out to the grassroots and find meaning in stories where the price of eggs matter. That's something that Donald Trump and the Republicans did very well by reaching down to the impact of the inflation after COVID. Because to every penny pinching poor family, the price of each egg matters and determines how much food there will be on the family table. Because more than anything, this election's mandate does boil down to the price of eggs. Americans want to lower the cost of living. That includes housing, food prices, gas prices, and other essentials that include healthcare, family care, and secure and well paying employment. Americans need and want that stability. That's the only mandate that this election gives the governing party. And despite the fact that Democratic policies aimed and succeeded in bringing inflation down after the pandemic, it simply was not enough to overcome the mess Donald Trump left behind in 2020 or Donald Trump's falsities and blame shifting in this election. So the American people is giving Donald Trump another chance to take democratic institutions and economic progresses and run them aground, scrap them completely, or to follow them through to the benefit of the American people. If Donald Trump adopts his false mandate and oppresses the American people with what he thinks is best for his ruling class to the expense of the working American, that will show the consequences of the false mandate Donald wants to impose on Americans will backfire on Donald, just like it did between 2016 and 2020. Because Donald's setting our country up for failure, and that pain will be felt throughout the country and especially on poor Americans. It is important to note that poor Americans are just their votes are just as powerful as rich Americans. And there are many more poor Americans than there are rich Americans. And the irony that Donald Trump, who has before and will continue to give tax breaks to the ultra rich at the cost of the poorest while cutting services that are critical to the poorest, will reflect in the next electorate, and the poor of our country will remember that. I wholly believe that we will remember how Donald Trump completely abandoned the poor and working people, despite the fact that that is the demographic that gave him the most votes. Because the policies he's going to implement, if it is even close to being what it was in the first term, will not help the working American. And we will see inflation shooting up and shooting down, and oil prices going up and going down, of volatility of employment with no stability in society. When that becomes apparent to every working American, that will be the time that MAGA will lose its grip on the people. But if they succeed in their campaign by doing good for the American people, maybe MAGA will survive. If MAGA continues the policies of this administration that has brought back inflation down from the era of COVID that Donald left us, if Donald Trump chooses the country to really progress, he would take those policies forward, not scrap them and introduce legislation and policies that will only benefit the rich and powerful. So, with that said, let's stop playing the blame game. Let's also stop pretending like Donald Trump's victory was some sort of a blanket mandate for Donald Trump to impose and oppress the American people with what he thinks and what his allies think the American people at large need. Because American people, what at large they need is a lower cost of living with more money in the bank, with enough money so they don't have to worry about the price of eggs. That's what Americans need, and that's what Americans want. Will Donald Trump will he be able to deliver that? That's what we're going to see in the upcoming 4 years. My bet is that Donald Trump will fail miserably again, and our country will suffer for it. But I don't believe that democracy is dead simply because Donald Trump won. He is trying, he's setting us up for failure. He's setting us up for failure with department heads who have no qualifications to do their jobs. But will our foundations hold? Will be dependent entirely on us coming out and reaching out and talking to one another and coming to terms with what has happened and how we can learn, grow, and move forward from that. So, with that said, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.